Welcome to video number 6 in the NAATI CPI test preparation series for Indigenous languages. In the videos before this one, we covered an introduction and overview to CPI testing, and then we've been going through the skills that are being marked on the test one by one: meaning transfer, consecutive technique, managing interaction, and speaking skills. So in this video, we're going to be talking about language competency, both for English and for your language. So in this video, we're going to cover the skills and level of language competency that are expected for CPI, what the markers are looking for, a few tips for the test, and a couple of exercises. So at the end of the lesson, you should be aware of the level of complexity of language for CPI dialogues and the language skills that you'll need to pass the test. And you should know how to prepare for the dialogues based on the brief that you'll receive. What level of language competency are we talking about? Well, we're talking about a level for interpreting, not just a conversation level. So at this level, you need to be able to interact easily with native speakers at normal pace in both English and in your language. So they shouldn't feel like they have to slow down for you. You should know common idioms and slang, and you should know common terminology in regular settings for dialogue interpreting jobs, just as your average adult native speaker would. So those kind of topics or job areas might be Centrelink, general health topics, police conversations, business topics, and education and interactions with the school and other government services, or regular topics for consultation. What will markers be looking for? Well, first of all, they'll be checking to make sure you understand fully idioms, technical terms, implied meaning, and regional differences and language trends and language change. Things like how young people speak as opposed to how old people speak, or in different areas. So it's quite hard to check understanding and mark understanding in a CPI test directly, but they will also do it through seeing how well you do meaning transfer. The next point will be how easy you are to understand. Do you have good word choice and good grammar, so it all comes out sounding natural? Pragmatics is then about the right way of doing things in a language and culture. So do you choose the right register and the right way of speaking for that setting? Maybe the right level of respect for the client you're talking to, but also for that workplace that you're working in. Ready for your tips for the test about language competency? Well, number one is that there will be workplace terminology in each dialogue. Just as I've mentioned that there will be idioms in each dialogue, there will be terms that are specific to each domain, so whether it's Centrelink or health or police, just as they would normally use without going overly specialised. So if you have a chance, work up your glossaries for all those areas, and you can take those glossaries into the test preparation and into the test. Not that you really have time to look at them then. And do use your research skills when you have that chance to prepare the brief, and we'll talk about that in a second. Because it's live, of course, you do have the chance to clarify if you don't understand a word. Next tip is about standard Australian English. Do your best to interpret into a real standard Australian English that all international speakers of English will understand as well. So you can't assume that they're used to operating in Aboriginal communities, particularly where other words are used in a special way in Aboriginal English. Last tip again is about borrowed English words, and I've mentioned this in other videos. Think about how well that English word is understood before you borrow it into your language interpreting. If you're borrowing it because you're trying to interpret quickly and you can't think of the word, of course it's not transferring the full meaning, and it may be taken as a gap in your language knowledge or in that transfer skill. This exercise is called shadowing, and basically it's playing copycat. This is a good exercise if you're training to do simultaneous interpreting, but it's also just a good exercise for language learning, particularly in your second language. What it does is make you practice words and sentences that you wouldn't normally say. So you can do it just by watching TV or listening to the radio, and all you're doing is listening and copying exactly what the people say. If you hear any new words, of course, add them to your glossary. Now what I'm going to do just to demonstrate is I've got Mythbusters here on SBS On Demand, so I'm just going to practice shadowing so you can see how it's done. No, that's not it.
Shooting fish in a barrel.
Oh, shooting fish in a barrel.
Awesome.
That's it. Awesome. And then maybe later we can fit in stealing candy from a baby, if you want. Jamie and Adam won't be the first to destroy an innocent barrel, but they may be the first to seriously test if shooting fish inside a barrel is as easy as it sounds. Okay, so it's quite hard to keep up with, but something you could just practice, whether it's on the ad breaks or just little segments on TV. This exercise is about grammar and flexibility. It's called a closed test, but basically it's fill the gap. So what you're trying to do is predict what a speaker might say. So we're going to read this sentence and see there's a gap in the middle. We're going to fill it as many ways as we can, with one word or a few words. David wants to beep the car ready for tomorrow. So we could fill that gap by saying, David wants to wash the car ready for tomorrow. David wants to fuel up the car ready for tomorrow. David wants to get the car ready for tomorrow. There's 3. I'm sure you could hit pause now and think of lots more. Try it. Okay, one thing is reading a sentence with a gap in it, but of course, being interpreters, we should probably practice this orally. So let's try doing an oral fill the gap. I'm going to read a sentence with a beep in the middle and try and fill it as many ways as you can. When Dad cooks dinner, he always puts beep on my plate. I'll say it one more time, then hit pause and fill it as many times as you can. When Dad cooks dinner, he always puts beep on my plate. How did you go? I would have always said that Dad puts too much on my plate, but I'm sure you came up with other options. Here's another one. Ready? I'll say it once and then you try hit pause and fill the gap. When the next doctor starts at 12 o'clock, she will beep you again. Hit pause. Now this exercise is really important. This is about preparing the brief, and this is about what you do with the narrative text that you'll receive at the start of each CPI dialogue. For each of the 3 dialogues, you'll get a paragraph or 2 like this, giving you some context. For example, a language speaking person from a remote community, Jackie Brown, has just been robbed by a group of youths whilst visiting town. She is at the police station to report it. The police officer is taking her statement. She's quite upset as she has lost all her money. That's the information you have to prepare. You get 15 minutes. You can use dictionaries, you can use glossaries, you can use the internet, and you can prepare yourself ready to go into the dialogue. You can take notes into the dialogue as well. Whether you have time to look at them during interpreting, probably not. But it's important to use those 15 minutes to get your head in the right space. So the first thing to do is to prepare the vocabulary. Now there's a lot of writing on this slide. It's probably best if you look at page 21 in your workbook, where you can see the same information. Now I've half filled out the information, but there's plenty of space for you to write extra notes, particularly about the language words that you might be thinking of. The vocabulary that you're going to prepare, well, you can look at the words that were directly used in the brief, We saw there were words like robbed, youth, report, statement, lost. So you might think about things like, okay, youths, it means young people, but maybe to interpret that accurately into your language, you need to know how old they are, whether they're teenagers, whether they're kids, whether they really are adults, just young adults. It might affect the pronouns that you choose, particularly if you need to know if they're boys or girls or mixed. And maybe even if you have pronouns in your language for 3 people as opposed to a group, that might change how you would interpret from English into language. You could then also prepare just general police vocabulary, other related words like stole, arrest, charge, offender, and any other language words that you've already used in police interpreting before. Then you want to think about the register. So this is thinking about how formal people speak or how formal you should speak for that situation. So the police will use a fairly formal register, maybe not as much as in a courtroom. And the victim, well, she's upset, and you might also think about her dialect or her accent if she's coming from a remote community. That might change the way she speaks. You can think about the pragmatic goals, what each speaker is trying to get out of that interaction. So the policeman is trying to take a statement. He's trying to get the whole story written down for a report, maybe help the victim, maybe it'll lead to an arrest. They're the things that might be going through the policeman's mind. As for the victim, well, she's there to report it to police, to get help, to get her money back, or to get help to get home. Maybe she doesn't want the kids to get in trouble. I don't know. You could think of different scenarios just so you can prepare yourself for different ways the dialogue might go. You could think about the risks and challenges, like when you have an emotional client like that, she might be distressed and hard to understand. She may ask you for help as the interpreter, or look for support, or ask you directly for money. So it's worth thinking about any of those issues that might pop up during the dialogue. So just to review this tutorial, here are a few questions that you can hit pause after them and see if you can answer them. What is the minimum language competency level for both English and language for CPI? Can you interpret everything on a CPI dialogue literally? Name 3 topic areas that might be the context for the CPI dialogues. What are the markers looking for in your language proficiency? And lastly, what resources will you use to prepare the brief? So after you finish watching this video, you've got those exercises there. Shadowing you should do regularly and wherever you are. So if you're just at home watching TV, that's a great opportunity, but try and do it regularly. And if you can, take notes from new words into your glossaries. In the workbook, there's some other closed test examples to practice your grammar and predicting what people might say. And there's those pages on preparing the brief, both for a face-to-face dialogue and a phone dialogue. So once you've finished all those exercises and this tutorial, you should now know what level of language competency is required at the CPI level and understand what the markers are looking for. And you should now know how to prepare the language based on the brief for each of the CPI dialogues. In our next tutorial, we'll be talking about marking the test, how the test is marked based on a rubric, which are like levels, and what those pass requirements are, the feedback that you'll get, and options for supplementary tests.